And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a newcomer into the temple, coming to us from Joe Care Systems. I probably mispronounced that. Creator
No.
of previously covered A Once in a Million Chance at Adventure, a its numerous expansions, as well as Zombateer, Soapboxes, Control, and most recently with his largest project to date, if I'm understanding things, Oceania
Yes.
2084, the one and only Johan Eriksson. That's two S's, by
Yeah.
the way. How you doing today, man? Or tonight, I
Uh,
guess. I guess in your
Tonight,
case.
time is in the middle of the night over here in Sweden. I'm doing well.
Mm-mm.
I had a bit of a shitty day, but I caught up to it, and now I'm having a blast actually. I've been sitting here tending to my Kickstarter and looking through final details. And yeah, I've just been productive. So that's where I'm at right now,
Yep.
kind of.
Well, for every day there is an evening.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So, a bit of a tradition around here is opening with the humble beginnings, the
Hmm.
origin story, as it were, or for certain GMs, the villain origin story.
Yeah.
So, walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Hmm. So this is a bit of a thing. I didn't start playing games until really late, but I know I was like 9 when I got a copy of, I think it's called Dragonbane in the translated English version.
Yeah,
It's a
I know it's
Swedish developed game, right?
yeah. I've when the quick start and then later the full version of Dragonbane got translated by Free League. I'd covered
Mm,
it on the show and tried to say its original Swedish name and butchered it because I don't know if you
exactly.
figured this out. I can't speak Swedish. I know that
Exactly.
that's
Drakar och Demoner
yeah,
is the Swedish
yeah,
pronunciation of that.
Dragons and Demons, which is highlighted in one of the game's core mechanics, specifically how it
Exactly.
refers to crits successes and crit fails. Um,
Exactly. So that was my first ever encounter with role-playing games. And I remember this thing. I was getting this box from a friend who didn't have any friends who wanted to play, so he gave me the game, basically.
mhm.
This is sometime um, early 90s, I think. Um, and basically, I opened the box and I started reading, and I looked at all these images and figured out that, oh, wait, this is a game. This box contains a rule set that allows me and friends to imagine this together and to create our own worlds, basically. And they provided this amazing bestiary. I got completely like entrenched. And then I realized I didn't have friends to play with at that point. So I sat there reading it and I sat there remixing it and I sat there like imagining what it would be to play it. And then I went to, I remember this specifically, I went to the toy store and bought another Swedish role-playing game, Mutant.
That
Um,
I'm familiar with.
yeah, good, good. So that was like the first sci-fi game that I encountered.
Hmm.
And yeah, well, the same scenario there. I didn't have anyone to play with, so I read the rule books. I poured over them, and I really like consumed them super enthusiastically. I started drawing and creating my own adventures. I started doing all these things, and no one to test with. Um, and by then, back then, we had no concept of solo play. So basically, that was what I did.
Yeah.
And then I remember I a couple of years later, maybe one or two, I started writing my own first role-playing game. That was a complete, like, my own system, so to speak. I was then maybe 11 or something.
Hmm.
It was called Ninpo, and I wanted to make like samurai, uh, Japanese setting, basically. Um, and yeah, it was a fantastically fun thing. It never went anywhere. I actually found it last year when I was moving in a box. That was kind of cool.
Hmm.
It's not a good system, but for an 11-year-old, that was kind of cool.
Hmm.
um, who had never played games of that sort. But anyways, and then a few years later, I went into Cult, um, the horror game.
Hmm.
Um, and then I started playing Warhammer actually. So I veered into more board gamey territory or tabletop-y territory
Hmm.
because there I could find people who wanted to play with me. Um, and then it was, I think I played my first actual campaign in an actual role-playing game when I was around 17, something like
Hmm.
that. Um, and then I had a hiatus where I didn't play any games because I went and became a student at a college and I didn't have time for a while. And then I don't remember, this must be like 2002 or 2003. I
Hmm.
started playing Call of Cthulhu with a couple of friends.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, and then in more recent years, I've been playing a lot of role-playing games with a bunch of different groups and different friends. And the way we've played is basically trying out systems. So doing one shots or three shots, uh, just to try the differences between the different systems. So basically going through a huge catalog of co-owned games, basically, and just making sure we experience as much of the field as possible. And that way of playing has been going on for like maybe 6, 7 years now. So that's kind of it,
Hmm.
I think.
Yeah, and there are. I'm no. I'm no stranger to the TTRPG scenes in certain countries, and it's interesting that you bring up Mutant, so
Mhm.
which of course nowadays most people are gonna know that as Mutant Year Zero.
Yeah.
Um, but there is one other um project that was in that was in those early days of Swedish role playing that I'm curious
Mm.
if you saw the name in passing or the like. Um, I only know of it as fantasy with an exclamation point. I'm not sure if that was the what the original game would have been named as. Um,
Yeah. I know which one you're referring to. I
hmm.
actually haven't read it. I've seen the cover. I've seen like the box of it, but I haven't actually played it
Yeah.
and I haven't read it.
Apparently, that was one of the earliest iterations of role playing over in Sweden. Um,
Hmm.
there,
Yeah.
though, I've had a fair few Swedes on the show in the last few years, and one game that some people have said is um their entry point
Hmm.
was what was one that came out of not Sweden per se, but Germany.
Hmm.
That being the Dark Eye or Das Schwarze
Yeah, oh, yeah,
Auge.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and apologies to anybody from Germany listening to this and bitching at me for my bad German. I'm do I only know one language. I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But
No, I know that game. I've read through not the whole rule set, but I've looked at like the mechanical parts of it because I had a bunch of German role-playing friends
hmm.
that I met a couple of years back, and they talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
Um, that game for me, I've always had like a bit of a problem when it becomes too um, like I'm going to use the word that I actually don't like when it becomes too crunchy. where you have to calculate like arrow trajectories and stuff. And I think the Schwarze Auge is just like on the verge of becoming that for me. Um,
I I can now obviously I can't speak to the totality of it because the only versions of the Dark Eye that I'm familiar with are fourth and fifth edition.
mhm.
I can see where it comes from because I when I did my review of it, I reviewed fifth edition, and
Mm.
one of the things I said is that it going the freeform route that it's trying to go is a double-edged sword,
Yeah,
as most games that go freeform when it comes to creation and advancement are,
yeah,
in the sense that yes, freeform can allow for a lot of freedom and flexibility in terms of how you build characters.
mm.
On the other hand, it can create analysis paralysis,
Exactly, exactly.
and
That's
it
very much
is
the situation.
when you give player and maybe you came to the same conclusion, but I've always felt that when you give players a limited resource, there is going to be a tendency to play conservative with it.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I call this the rainy day paradox.
Yeah.
Saving for a rainy day even if it never comes.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh, or we all know that one person who will hold on to a healing potion until the end of time and space.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have been that person, and you can't see it, but I'm raising my hand
Yeah.
because I know I'm just as guilty.
No, exactly, exactly. I might need it more later, but you're almost dead now.
Actually, the worst case is somebody going, I can't use one of my 99 megalixirs. What if I need it for later? He says while up
Yeah,
against the final boss of the campaign.
exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
and I did take a gander through a good amount of what you've put up on itch,
Hmm.
and yeah, a lot of it certainly leans into the lighter end of things. Though I'd say a good chunk of it is either in beer and pretzels or not necessarily story game.
Hmm.
I had said the one in a million chance at adventure is very much a beer and pretzels game, mostly because of the subject matter. But
Hmm.
with some with some of the other ones, they're very light, not very zine-sized kind of things.
Yeah, yeah,
And
definitely.
The austere edition of
Yeah.
Oceania 2084, your upcoming project, is about 100 pages, and I'm assuming that the full book is going to be larger than that. Would that make this your first full-size TTRPG project?
Yes, I would say so. Um, the uh, the actually printed book that the limited edition called the surplus edition,
Mm-hmm.
um, that it will be um, not expanded in any way on the rules side of things, but it will include the solo rules uh, in addition to the core rule book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to get minor revisions and stuff. But yeah, it is definitely the far biggest thing I've done when it comes to role-playing games. I tend to have this design philosophy that if I can scale it down, if I can abstract away uh, parts, I tend to want to do that. So the reason why the Discworld game is so slim in design, so to speak, on the lighter end of the spectrum, is because I really do like just getting that core idea that I have good and then not add too much more. Because I also know that a lot of people do a lot of home brewing either way. So I kind of like this co-creation aspect of doing light games that people then can fleshify, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many of my previous streams you've seen, but I and some of my colleagues have ranted on multiple occasions about guidance. In
Hmm.
that, yes, people are going to homebrew, people are going to house rule, but at least make it easier for them.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't push them off of the high dive and say swim.
Mm. No,
Um,
exactly.
it's because of that guidance is a big deal. That's kind of why it's kind of why the fate system was something of a turnoff because of the lack of guidance for its
Mhm.
aspect system.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And
which I've
this is actually interesting because the if we're looking at the Discworld game, the one in a million chance at adventure,
mhm.
the reason I started doing all these expansions or the additional rule sets was because I wanted to provide that guidance, basically. If you're looking at what they are, for the most part, they are basically suggestions for how to uh, further elaborate on what's already there. Um, whether it's uh, the additional auditing rules, or it's the character creation archetypes. All of them are like they just basically provide you with scaffolding for how to set up your own thing in a sense.
Hmm.
So that is very much that point. And the reason I did that was because I started receiving when people started playing that game, I got more and more feedback on like I like what you're doing here, but I wish I could do more with it. And I think I could if I just could get the tone right. So the tone of that thing was always the focus because that's the thing that people were the most challenged with when it comes to Pratchett, right? Because humor is hard to do. Um, and so that was basically the design challenge that I tried to kind of tackle in that whole project. How do I make people feel comfortable enough in order to create these um, humorous or absurd situations? And how do I make that so that it's not reliant upon someone being a funny person, right?
Or in some cases, being intimately familiar with Discworld, because
Yeah,
that's not real. I know some people argue, why would you play a Discworld game? Why would you pick up a Discworld game if you're not a fan? I'm like,
yeah.
the GM might be, the GM might have an extensive knowledge of Discworld, but you shouldn't assume that the whole damn table will.
No,
Um,
exactly, exactly,
yeah, and
exactly.
I've seen I've seen that kind of thing with some games that are either officially licensed or fan games based on certain IP. Some
Mm,
folk assume that you already know um, the subject matter, which you shouldn't. Um,
yeah.
but and that brings me to Oceania 2084.
Mm,
Obviously built um, off of George Orwell's 1984.
hmm
That was already clear. But one of the things that immediately struck out to me
mm,
is having different types of sheets for different character archetypes within it. You know,
hmm
you have a sheet for the different classes. You have two varieties of sheets for either Big Brother or the Resistance.
hmm
And was one of your goals to try and do this kind of mix and match thing with the character sheet?
Kind of. Um, I've always had this love of character sheets. In essence, for me, character sheets gives when I'm new to a system, when I'm picking up a system that I haven't played yet, I always look at the character sheet first, right? Because it provides you like a roadmap to what the game will entail.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I wanted to make. I'm going to let you in on a little like design process secret here. Um, Before I wrote a single line of rules for Oceania, I did the character sheet, the resistance character sheet, not the class sheet, but the resistance character sheet,
Mm-hmm.
just in an attempt to kind of, for myself, abstract away what do I need to tell the stories that I want to tell with this game, and trying to make me love that character sheet. And so that's where I actually started the process of making that game. And then basically from that, I started writing the rule sections on how to explain each of these um, visually presented stats and stuff. Um, so yeah, the sheet creation was really instrumental to creating that game.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Now, I've talked on multiple occasions about a concept I call all roads lead to Rome. This
Mm-hmm.
idea of a singular unifying resolution mechanic, which has
Mm-hmm.
been that's been more or less the norm for TTRPGs. I'd say since the mid to late '80s. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
obviously you look at the really early stuff, like the stuff that was coming out in the '70s, and because it was still building off of that wargaming mindset, it's it's going on this idea. It's going on this idea of these little sub mechanics for different things that has kind of fallen by the wayside, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with the rise of more narrativist affairs, you couldn't really do that. So
Yeah.
with Oceania, what is your Rome in terms of the core resolution mechanic?
So here comes the kicker, right? Um, for the resistance players, there is no traditional resolution mechanic at all. There is a limitation to what they can imagine freeform, and that is that whatever act that they're describing has to be doable within 10 minutes in game. Um, but if, let's say, you are playing as a proletarian,
Mm-hmm.
and you're in an office, for example, and you want to sabotage the printer for some unknown reason, um, you would have to describe how you're doing it in increments of 10-minute steps to get that done. Um, and whatever you say, you do. Um, that is there is nothing limiting you from it. For example, you're not rolling any dice to see if you succeed or not. However, you are rolling dice to see if your emotions are seen by others or not. So let's say you're doing something and you feel anxious about it. You roll a die to see if anyone would be able to spot that. You would roll dice to see if a situation that occurs while you're doing that around you triggers some kind of response in you. Um, so it's more like an avoiding detection system. Um, if you are doing an act, whatever act it might be, as soon as your act might be interpreted as treason in any way, the Big Brother player rolls hidden dice to see if you are observed or not. Um, and so if you are observed uh, and you're doing something that is classified as treason in any way, Big Brother player gains a point, a surveillance point, we can call it. It's called suspicion points in the game. Um, and those points, the Big Brother player later can use to give you consequences to your actions or give reactions to your doings, so to speak. So it's a delayed reaction, basically. So I would say that the Rome of this is avoiding being seen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is the thing, the core of the experience. It's a social stealth game to some extent.
And this might be a little bit obvious, but I have to bring it up.
Mhm.
Has anyone brought up paranoia to you in the
Yes,
development of this?
yes, it's an inspiration.
Yeah, there's been times where where I've thought something was an inspiration just from my own observation, but it turns
Hmm.
out that was coincidental. So I always have to double
Yeah,
check on that.
no, no, I name drop Paranoia as one of the inspiration games that I've actually like looked on at when I was developing this. It's definitely not the same thing, but it has patterns that are similar.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the things is Paranoia leans into this comedic version of this, right? That solves the design challenge of how to make dystopia entertaining or engaging by just being able to laugh at it. I wanted to make Orwell in the way Orwell was, which is very much not a laughing matter. How do you make something that bleak and dark and horrible into something that still is engaging and meaningful for the players? That's the
Hmm.
design challenge I put in front of myself. Um,
Yeah, and obvious, obviously, there's still even with that, there's still going to be the inevitable bit of humor that's going to be present at some tables
Definitely.
because of course once it's out of your hands, all bets are off,
Yeah,
essentially.
definitely. I mean, I haven't actually received any like um reports on comedy happening within the system. But of course, that's going to happen at some tables, like you say. I mean, if that's the case, then that's the case.
Yeah.
When I've been playing it myself, I've not considered me playing it as actual playtesting. I've just enjoyed trying it out with friends. Um,
Hmm.
there has been occasions where something silly happens because we are humans, right? Uh, I think that the main thing, though, is that stakes are high all the time. It's a kind of tense game.
Hmm.
So even when things are like starting to lean into humorous, you're still nervous. And I think that was the best part of it as I've experienced it so far. Um, so it's a laughter with this kind of like, attention to it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I know that you said earlier that it's more of a social stealth affair, but
Mhm.
the way you're describing it, I think an even better analogy would be to consider a heist story.
Yeah, many of the sessions I've played have an element of heistiness to it, but I would say that the core engine of the system is more about exploring the relationships between um, you as resistance players and the characters that exist in the world, whether or not they're your friends or family members or their um, regime characters.
Hmm.
Um, because there is what I've done is basically I've connected the um, creation of new relationships in a mechanical manner to your uh, character's actual stats.
Hmm.
So there are ways you can, let's say you befriend someone. If you befriend someone, which is a defined act, um, then you will gain a few hope points. Hope points allow you to do specific things within the game, for example. So there is a currency connected to the social aspect. Um, so that's basically where it becomes important, and which the system gives you the scaffolding or the support in. Um, and I think that also comes from I've always had this feeling that a lot of the games that are focused on attributes in the classical fantasy or sci-fi adventure type thing, where you have strength and agility and all these things, right? Um, what I've always like, I like toying with the idea about what happens if we don't use those types of measurements or values and try to tie the mechanics to other things in the experience. So this is, in a sense, that was my experiment also when I was doing this.
You're not. You're certainly onto something, and I've tooled around with that in the past. I've had an idea in one. I had an idea in one case of doing a wuxia game where instead of using the core stats, I used the 8 aspects of the I Ching.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not in a way that's not far removed from, say, approaches that some variants of Powered by the Apocalypse uses, just a little bit further into that.
Mm.
Um, Especially since wuxia is a genre that I think a lot of people have seen, even if they don't know the name, because
Yeah,
everybody's seen a
yeah,
kung fu movie at one point. They're just not familiar with the term wuxia.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, definitely. And I think also worth mentioning in relation to this, that exploration is that the the emotion engine, the values and emotions that is at the core of the actual character. Um, I mean, they visually on the character sheet, they look like attributes, um, but they're actually constantly changing depending on if you're succeeding or failing the roles. So it's a very fluid type of stat that governs parts of your play. It's a lot of like changing the score back and forth and seeing what happens. It's similar to the blood pool points of Vampire. Is it called blood pool?
yeah,
No, it's
just
rage, right?
um, there's a. I'd say the biggest parallel that comes to mind with this sort of thing, especially with the balancing act you have to pull
Mm.
when it comes to dealing with emotions, is not necessarily the blood pool in Vampire, but rather the relationship that you have with humanity and the
Oh
beast.
yeah, 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 exactly. That's what I mean. That's what I meant. I just
Mm-hmm.
didn't remember the names of it. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I meant. So that's basically the inspiration point for that whole thing, that it
yeah.
becomes a balancing act.
The
And
other the other thing that came to mind, and this is admittedly a bit more of a reach, but
mhm.
there is a game I've covered in the past, a very good game I should note, that's only like $10, called All of Their Strengths.
Oh, I
And
haven't heard of this one.
All of Their Strengths was largely inspired by Blade, by
Okay.
the Blade movies. I mean that's part of where the name comes from.
Yeah.
But one of the central ideas with it is that you're not necessarily rolling to see if you succeed or fail. If you're trying to do something, you succeed.
Hmm.
It's if you want to do more than just succeed at it
Hmm.
is where you do the rolls, and those rolls are not to see if you succeed or fail, but whether or not you're able to do so without complication.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah,
depending
yeah.
on how those die end up rolling, the GM can bank those to mess with you later on,
Hmm.
which I think is far more interesting than whether or not there's some extra effect in the moment. It's like
Yeah.
you succeeded. What are those dice for? Oh, don't worry about those.
Can you repeat the name of that game?
All of their strengths.
All of their strength. I'm gonna look this up because that sounds super interesting.
Yeah, and it's like it's another case of looking at the way things are assumed to be working, and trying to tweak them with other
Hmm.
experimental ideas.
Yeah.
Now, granted, all of their strengths is meant to be far more of a power fantasy, but
Hmm.
it doesn't pretend that it's doing anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. I hear you. I hear you.
I've I've never been a big fan of when a game says, "Oh, you can use this to run just about any kind of fantasy or any kind of sci-fi,
Hmm.
but the actual mechanics, the writing, etc., is very much skewed towards a certain subgenre within that umbrella." Plus, saying like when Alternity says, "Oh, you can use this to run any kind of sci-fi." While technically true, there's a whole lot of asterisks because any one genre is going to be a wide net. It's it's like it would be as ridiculous as saying that Twitter and Corpse Grinder are the same because they're both metal bands.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
When one is a grindcore act and the other one is a folk metal act.
yeah.
Eh,
No, exactly.
may have the same instruments, but that's the only thing they have in common.
Yeah.
But obviously, because of the subject matter, there's always a risk of somewhat of a GM not quite knowing how to what the right way to set up a campaign to have the same feel as the world that this will take place in.
Hmm.
Within the full book, do you plan on putting a bit of advice for GMs in terms of what some of the do's would be? Obvious, the don'ts are going to be obvious for
Yeah.
getting down that particular feel.
I like this question because it gets to the root of one thing with this design. I have referred to this game as GM-less. And then I've been asked, why do you call it GM-less? Because you have one player playing as Big Brother. And the reason for this is that the role of Big Brother is so different from what you expect a GM to be, so that it actually confuses you if you think you will be the GM while playing Big Brother. One part of this puzzle is that narrative control is completely shared between everyone in around the table. When it comes to describing the world, when it comes to describing NPCs, when it comes to controlling NPCs, and it's who has control over a certain specific part of the world is regulated through their current um, uh, I'm dropping words. It's late in the night here. A certain trust level. So your trust level basically sets you up for wherever, if you're in a specific place and you're a class or a specific character that has access to that area, you will be the one defining how it looks, how it
Mm-hmm.
smells, who is there. Um, Big Brother has to pay these suspicion points in order to inject narrative control into these scenes. And Big Brother is heavily restricted in comparison to the resistance characters that are not heavily restricted. And so it really puts the responsibility for describing the dystopia, for describing this horrific version of the future into the hands of the group, not into the hands of one player. And I think that's a really fundamental, important part of this game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I and I'm get. It sounded like you. It sounded like you. Unless I misheard it. You do
Hmm.
plan on putting a few adventure out. Not, well, adventure's not the right word, but it's the closest one I can think of at the moment.
Hmm.
Outlines for the full book. That is that the case, or was I misinterpreting?
But not really. In the austere edition, that's already released for free. In the final chapter, it's all about how to run a campaign. It has 3 different campaign modes, and it contains different setup for each of these campaign modes. Um, and basically, it allows you to tailor make your setup, your long-term goals, your character creation, etc., or whatever preference that your group has. So if you like to have very, very sandboxy feel, there is one specific campaign mode for that. If you'd like to have a specific project that your resistance characters are working towards at the start of the game, there's one campaign mode for that, for example. So I've already included that within those 100 pages, actually. It also contains a few like world generating tools. For example, a table about the personality of the city that you're playing in. And it can be anything from, I'm not going to quote this exactly now, but like calm, solitary, and scary to ecological, high technology, smiling. So there are different vibes, basically, that you either choose or roll a die to see which type of dystopia that you're going to experience. So here I'm going away from the classical Orwell, basically.
Yeah.
And also good to know is that I've intentionally left a lot of the fiction, this world building thing as fragments of world building or intentionally undefined, because I really want parts of this to be the exploration of the player's self-perceived dystopia. So basically, I didn't want to define which oppressions that you will explore, that you, during campaign setup, you define that. It's actually part of the character creation. Each character has a deviation. The deviations are anything that your character has as a type of secret drive, something they need to have in their life that is actually outlawed by the state. So when you're creating your character, you're basically giving the premises for the oppression that you are going to live through with your character. So that's also part of setting up the campaign, even though it's actually in the character creation. And that's also a scaffolding thing for imagining the world together. So the all of these things are kind of interconnected, and I guess that kind of relates to how I think about making game systems at large. I tend to see them as only as good as they are actually affecting each other, and I tend to not leave stuff hanging, and there's a lot of complexity that you might not see at first glance when looking at this system. Things are intricately like pieced together and affects each other in cascading ways that you realize after maybe 2 sessions into the game, for example.
So would you say that this particular game is leaning towards one shots, or could someone do a multi-session campaign with Oceania?
Yeah, it's not good for one shots. I can say that directly. I've had problems when I wanted to showcase this game at conventions, for example, because the one shot allows you to experience like a 10% of the full experience. It's meant to be played in longer campaigns, and longer meaning more than 5 sessions. It's specifically designed to be a campaign type game. One of the reasons why I say that so very assertively is that it's inspired by roguelikes, in that you're meant to play several characters during a campaign. So I'm expecting, or the game expects you actually to create a character initially and then do things with that character, changing the narrative truth of the game through that life, and then dying, and then taking up on the role of one of that character's friends or family, and continue living in that same fiction. And so basically, a life becomes a dungeon delve or a run into this world. And then you die and you get reset on certain things, but the things that your previous character did will help you in the next attempt to do that thing that you're trying to do. And this is true for all the Resistance characters. And that mechanic specifically doesn't really come into play until like session 2 or 3. Because that's when Big Brother will have accumulated enough points to start actually offing you. So that is one part of what creates the really good narratives and experiences within this game system.
Now, with that said, for the Surplus Edition, what are you shooting for as far as a page count?
A page count, it's going to be A5 book format, and it's going to be around 250 pages, something like that.
Yeah, that's standard for a core book.
Yeah, and it's going to be illustrated by a colleague of mine, Mika Edström, an awesome illustrator. In the Kickstarter that's opening tomorrow, there's going to be a link to their art station, so you can check out all the fancy illustrations that they've done in the past, and stuff like that. But yeah, around 250 pages is what it's going to be.
And are you planning on having that Kickstarter run for the usual 30 days?
Yeah, it's 30 days, and it opens tomorrow, actually. So from tomorrow and 30 days forward, you can actually secure yourself a physical copy. It's a very limited edition also. Only 500 books will be printed if we reach the goal. So
yeah, and I will put a link to the Kickstarter in the description when the
awesome.
thing goes live.
Thank you so much.
But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness that happens here.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure. This is fun.
And
getting to talk about my own systems and my own games, that's amazing. And then also talking about general systems, and I love this.
Well, welcome to how things work here in the temple. Oh. And anytime you see fit to return, whether it's to further discuss Oceania or just to laugh at whoever ends up praying to the dice gods expecting mercy, there is none. The door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. There will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.